What's up guys, it's Eric from Rare Candy, and today I'm going to be covering my tournament report for the recent regional held in Roanoke, Virginia. And this tournament was actually kind of interesting too because it was among one of the first major events where Forbidden Light was going to be legal, and more interesting, this was actually an expanded tournament, which means that cards all the way back from Black and White all the way up to the most recent set, Forbidden Light, were going to be legal for play. So not only was Forbidden Light legal, and we have all these new exciting cards that have entered the card pool, but expanded itself in general is just such a huge format in terms of the amount of sets that I think it made this tournament a little bit interesting in terms of what decks we could expect to make an appearance here. But even though Forbidden Light did give us an exciting new archetype in the form of Malamar with Ultra Necrozma, or even maybe other partners like the old Necrozma GX, I still think Expanded in general wouldn't see a big change in the amount of different archetypes that we would expect to see at this tournament. So some of the popular decks in the Expanded format, if you guys aren't familiar with it, are going to be cards like Seismitoad EX all the way back from Furious Fist, the Night March deck, but then also there's a lot of other decks that we currently have in Standard format that are also pretty popular in the expanded format, like Zoroark variants, Garbodor variants, and Buzzwole, which also got a nice new boost from this new Forbidden Light set. So a lot of decks that we've kind of been used to seeing for a while, both in standard and the expanded format. I personally didn't expect Malamar to actually have a big showing at this event, just because the format I think is kind of hostile to that style of deck. You have things like Zoroark variants, which can chain Hex Maniac turn after turn. A lot of decks play Sudowoodo, and just in general, I think the metagame can kind of easily deal with a lot of the Malamar variants that we typically see in the standard format. But nevertheless, I do think Forbidden Light actually would have an impact on this tournament in terms of the decks that would show up. So of course, some of the best new support in Forbidden Light is going to be aimed at Ultra Beast decks, most notably Buzzwole GX. So prior to this tournament in the expanded format, Zoroark was probably the most popular archetype that you would see in expanded, so naturally Buzzwole is kind of an easy way to an attempt to counter that. And with all of the new support that Buzzwole gained from Forbidden Light, I definitely expected Buzzwole to see an uptick in play at this upcoming event. And another deck that hasn't seen a ton of play in recent months, but one I did expect to see get a boost, is going to be Trevenant variants, because Trevenant does gain Mysterious Treasure, and it's a deck that typically doesn't like to discard a lot of resources, so the fact that you have Mysterious Treasure that you can replace your Ultra Balls with or play alongside Ultra Ball, I definitely expected to give that deck a little bit of a boost, and to see maybe a little bit of surge in popularity as well. But like I said, by and large, I expected most of the archetypes that we would see at this tournament be kind of the same ones we've seen at previous expanded tournaments in recent months, maybe just with slightly different ratios of different decks seeing play as opposed to the last expanded format. And even though it sounds like this format would still just kind of be the same old stuff, I honestly don't mind that. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you've probably heard me mention before is I really don't mind very solidified, stable formats like this, just because sometimes when you're going into a blind metagame after a new set drops and it causes all these shakeups to the metagame, sometimes it can be not only difficult to pick the right deck for the event, but if the deck you're picking is a new archetype, sometimes lists haven't been, quite optimized to their best version as of yet, and you might end up playing a list that isn't the optimal 60 sometimes. So for that reason, I like these types of tournaments. It makes picking a deck pretty easy, I think, at least for me. So then of course that begs the question, well, what to actually play for this event? Well, one thing you guys will have to keep in mind for me is that actually I wouldn't have even gone to Virginia Regionals, but I had already paid for the event, but I had previously gotten my Worlds invite at the last regional I went to in Toronto. But like I said, by that point I had already paid the entry fee for Virginia, so I decided, no, I'm still going to go. I already paid, may as well just go play and have some fun. So me picking a deck for this event, it wasn't quite as stressful as some of the others. Now, of course, I could play a top tier archetype, which I actually was testing a few of, but also, since like I said, I already have my Worlds invite and I'm not going for top 16, I have some flexibility in terms of what I could actually play. And it's actually been a while since I've played anything really roguish or anything like that at a major event. But leading up to this tournament, I knew I wanted to play a deck that could use Mysterious Treasure. I don't know if you guys saw our set review or our top 10 Forbidden Light cards. I've mentioned that Mysterious Treasure is definitely by far one of my most favorite cards to come out of Forbidden Light. So I know I wanted to play a deck that could abuse that. And so on my list very early on, I kind of knew there was basically one of two decks I was going to play at this event. One was going to be Trevenant. I think that was probably my most normal type of deck that I was considering playing. I had a lot of games in with the deck, And I was actually pretty happy with the list I had been testing out. And I always kind of knew I could fall back on Trevenant. It's an archetype I played all the way, even back to when Breakpoint first came out. I've always loved Trevenant as an archetype, and the fact that we have Mysterious Treasure for it now just made me want to play it even more. So like I said, I always knew I could fall back on Trevenant, but a deck that I was a little bit more interested in was Noivern GX. So you guys might have seen on the channel not too long ago, we actually did post a Noivern GX deck. I actually built it literally just for fun on PTCGO, just to have kind of like a fun rogue deck to put up on the channel. But upon testing with it, I actually became really interested in the deck. I was winning games a lot more convincingly than I thought I should be able to. I thought it was a complete meme, but like I said, after getting some games in with it, I realized this archetype actually has a lot more to it than I think what initially meets the eyes. So I've been testing both of these decks, but I was favoring just playing Trevenant. I think it was a bit of a safer pick. I had a lot of games in with it. It's not a super difficult deck to play either, which makes playing for 9 rounds at a regional a lot less stressful than maybe like a Zoroark variant, for an example, where there's a lot of micro decisions that you can make in a given turn. But 2 days prior to the event, I was doing some online testing with a local player from my area, Corey Misimer, and he kind of convinced me just to play Noivern. I already had my Worlds invite, and I hadn't played kind of a fun rogue deck like this in a long time. So I said, you know what, I got nothing to lose, I may as well play it. So I ultimately decided on Noivern GX for this event. Let's go ahead and take a look at the actual list that I used. Alrighty guys, so if you by chance saw the Noivern deck we posted on the channel a little bit ago, this list is actually very similar to that one. That one that we posted on the channel was kind of one of my early drafts of the deck, but it had undergone some changes since then. But just really quick, if you guys are not familiar with Noivern, let's go over the card really quick. It's a stage 1, 200 hit points from Burning Shadow, so it's a card that is actually legal in standard format right now. But one reason it doesn't see a whole lot of play is because it has kind of these awkward energy costs, but we have to remember in Expanded we have access to that amazing double dragon energy, which is basically a double rainbow for dragon types, which makes Noivern actually kind of a decent card. So let's take a look at its attacks. It has Distort for a dark and colorless, or of course just 1 double dragon energy. It is 50, and your opponent can't play any item cards from their hand during their next turn. So this is very similar to the Quaking Punch attack that we've seen on Seismitoad EX. It also has another attack called Sonic Volume for a Psychic, Dark, and Colorless is 120, and your opponent can't play any special energy cards from their hand during their next turn. So this is actually very similar to another card that we've seen paired with Seismitoad in the past, and that is Giratina EX. Has a very similar attack, does a little bit more damage than Giratina, but it also doesn't lock as many cards, but typically in the past, Giratina saw play to specifically lock special energies. So that's the main reason we would even want to play a card like this anyways. And then its GX attack, Boomburst GX, for the same attack cost, it does 50 to each of your opponent's Pokemon. So the question to ask is, well, why not just play Seismitoad over Noivern? Well, I just don't like Seismitoad. I've never enjoyed the card. For whatever reason, it's just never been a fun deck to play. And like I said, I want to have some fun at this regional since I really wasn't too worried about actually getting championship points here. But Noivern is a stage 1, so that means it is a little bit harder to get in play than Seismitoad, but you have 200 hit points. So that's going to be 20 more than Seismitoad. You also have free retreat cost, which is amazing. Seismitoad EX has a whopping 3 retreat cost, which actually can make the card a little bit clunky at times. And not only do you have something like Distort, which does more base damage than Seismitoad's, but you also have other attacks to fall back on. So in some matchups, sometimes Sonic Volume is just a better attack. So think of Night March and Zoroark, for example. Seismitoad doesn't really have a way to just lock those decks out of the game. Now, of course, the item lock part can be very disruptive, and of course, Seismitoad can win against these variants, just thanks to something like that and a conjunction with other cards that they might run. But with something like Sonic Volume, all you have to do is Sonic Volume while your opponent doesn't have any special energy in play, and guess what? They are actually shut out of the game since most decks don't play Pokemon Ranger. So you have a little bit more flexibility with this card than you would with something like Seismitoad. You also have some other interesting ways at increasing your damage output, and that is going to be the main partner we have with Noivern, and that's going to be Altaria. So Altaria is a Pokemon all the way back from Dragons Exalted, and it has an ability that makes your Dragon Pokemon do 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So this is kind of nice because we can get a couple of these Altarias in play, and we can start using Distort to do a lot of damage at a given time. So for example, Seismitoad players, they typically play Fighting Fury Belt to increase their damage by 10, and then they rely on a combination of Verbank City Gym and Hypnotoxic Laser to increase their damage output. Now of course, though Fighting Fury Belt only increases that damage by 10, you need the Verbank and the laser at the same time if you want to get that 30 damage from poison as opposed to the single 1 damage counter or 10 damage that just the Hypnotoxic Laser by itself would give you. But once you get one Altaria into play, it stays there unless your opponent hexes you or, knocks out your Altaria or something like that. Your damage output or your damage modifiers are much more consistent once you actually have access to them. So let's just run through the math really quick. With the Store, if you have a Choice Band, you're hitting for 80, and if you have an Altaria, you're hitting for 100 against GXs. And that's actually really important because think of Buzzwole, for example. With a Distort, with an Altaria and Choice Band, you can two-shot Buzzwoles while locking their items like Max Elixirs and Beast Rings, things like that. Also, if you have one Altaria in play and a Choice Band, you can actually knock out Tapu Leles with Sonic Volume as well. So you have a great way to actually close out games with Sonic Volume as well. Also, think about Trevenant variants. For example, if you were Seismitoad, you would not have a good way at actually doing a good bit of damage to Trevenant decks. You'd only be hitting for 30 a turn since they are locking your item cards. But with Noivern, if you have 1 to 2 Altaria, you can two-shot regular Trevenants and also two-shot Trevenant breaks if you have 2 Altaria in play as well. But the rest of the Pokemon line is pretty straightforward, playing 2 copies of Tapu Lele GX, of course. And the other interesting card in the list is 1 copy of Marshadow from Shining Legends. Now, the reason we are playing this in the deck is because there's going to be some turns where we might hit our Noivern, but we might whiff our Double Dragon energy or vice versa. So Marshadow gives us another way to just keep digging through our deck a little bit more. And so a lot of people might play Shaman to fill this role, but since we have 5 outs to a Marshadow in this list, since we play 3 Mysterious Treasure and 2 Ultra Ball, we have more outs to actually hitting the Marshadow as opposed to the Shaman. And of course, Shaman gives up 2 prizes, whereas Marshadow only gives up 1. So let's take a look at our trainer cards. We have a lot of draw in this deck. We have 3 Cynthia, 3 N, 1 Sycamore, 1 Colress. So we have, 8 draw supporters right there, but we also play 1 copy of Teammates as well in this list. That's actually a card that was not in the list I posted on the channel previously, but one I started testing with shortly afterwards, and I think ended up being one of my biggest MVPs of the weekend, because there's so many turns where all you need is Noivern and a Double Dragon Energy, but you might have, for example, the Double Dragon Energy in hand, but you have a Noibat in play, and you can't attach it to your Noibat. So instead of just searching your deck for the card you need, you're going to be forced to just play a draw supporter and just hope that you hit both off the draw supporter, which at times doesn't really pan out. So a lot of times just having the Teammates to grab exactly what you need is going to be a little bit more beneficial, especially if you don't have neither in hand. Something gets knocked out, you can throw Lele down, grab Teammates to grab your Noivern and Double Dragon Energy and start locking your opponents with Teammates. Absolutely fantastic card. Really got a lot of value out of it over the weekend. Also playing, of course, 2 copies of Guzma to choose what we want to take knockouts on. This is going to be far superior to Lysandre in this deck. Since our Noivern GXs do have free retreat, we never have to worry about having to promote something awkward off of a Guzma play. Also are playing 1 copy of Acerola just to make our Noivern's tank hits a little bit more. Rarely are we going to be one-shotting our opponent. We are going to be 2-shotting them. So Acerola is going to help us win the 2-shot war while simultaneously keeping our lot going. And then just 1 Bridget to round out our supporter cards here. Now, of course, this is the expanded format, so we do have Versus Seeker, so we are playing 4 of that to reuse all those various supporters. And we have a lot of item cards to go over here as well. Of course, 3 Choice Band, that's going to be a pretty obvious damage modifier that we're going to want here. Also playing 3 copies of Enhanced Hammer, and you guys might be thinking, well, Sonic Volume already locks special energy, so why do you even need Enhanced Hammer? And that's really because you can't really use Sonic Volume until turn 2 at the earliest. So a lot of times against decks that do play Double Colorless Energy as an example, they're going to get those down ahead of time, and you need a way to remove their existing special energy that are in play and then lock them out of the game afterwards. So Enhanced Hammers are just good at removing those energies that your opponent already was able to get in play. So in the case of Zoroark variants, they typically get maybe 1, maybe 2 Double Colorless Energies in play before your Noivern can start using Sonic Volume. Well, guess what? If you use Enhanced Hammer and then Sonic Volume, you're good to go. And of course, we also have 2 copies of Floatstone in this deck to give free retreat to the rest of our Pokemon here. one copy of Computer Search. That is going to be our A-Spec of choice. Computer Search is definitely very good because it will allow us to search out our double dragon energies. I do think there is a case to be made for Scoop Up Cyclone and Dowsing Machine as well, but I think having the option to get double dragon energies is just too good to pass on. Also playing one copy of Field Blower for the same reason we're playing Enhanced Hammer. Sometimes our opponent will be able to get maybe some stadiums or some tool cards in play before we get our Distort lock going. So being able to remove those existing tool cards that your opponent got into play before you start locking them is going to be nice. One copy of Rescue Stretcher just as a form of recovery. I do think you could potentially play Super Rod in here, but there's very few basic energy in this deck as it is, so I think Rescue Stretcher might just be a little bit better. And of course, one special charge, we are a very special energy reliant deck ourselves, so being able to get those back into the deck is going to be very important. And then 2 copies of Parallel City to round out the list. So originally I actually played Devoured Field in this deck, if you saw the video we posted on the channel before, but I opted for Parallel City here just because it kind of goes with the whole disruption theme of the deck. They can't Field Blower your Parallel Cities once you start using Distort. It forces them to have their own counter stadium, which is really nice. And also, I don't play anything like Sudowoodo as an example to deal with Zoroark GX. So sometimes if Zoroark can actually get a very early lead, they can beat this deck, even though it normally is an incredibly favored matchup for you. So Parallel City is just going to help make sure that Zoroark doesn't get too far ahead before you can get set up. And also is very nice against Trevenant as well. I do think Trevenant is actually one of this deck's absolute worst matchups, and I did not play Giratina promo at this event, so I'd like the idea to have Parallel City just because we can discard some of our damaged bench Pokemon that they've been spreading damage onto as well. So I think either card is fine, but I would kind of pick it depending on what techs you already play. And of course, to round out the list, we have 4 Double Dragon Energy, of course, which is going to do most of the heavy lifting in terms of powering up our attacks, but we do run a couple of basic energy in this list as well. So we're running 2 Psychic and 1 Dark. And the reason for that is because sometimes we don't want to attach a second Double Dragon Energy in order to use things like Sonic Volume. And also against certain decks in particular, you really want to get an energy down on your Noivats as soon as turn 1 if possible. So most notably things like Night March and Zoroark or even Seismitoad variants. You really want to get Sonic Volume off as soon as possible, because if you can just get Sonic Volume off successful, you can shut those decks out of the game. Now, of course, Seismitoad I do think is going to be a little bit trickier because they have all this energy denial, but in the case of Night March and Zoroark, those are actually some of your absolute best matchups just because of Sonic Volume. So being able to use that attack as quickly as possible is going to be really important. Now, of course, you could argue we should play 2 Dark as opposed to 2 Psychic because Distort needs at least a Dark energy to be used, but the reason we're playing the 2 Psychic over the 2 Dark is to be able to use Tapu Cure GX if we need to. So yeah guys, that is the list that I used at this event, but to be honest, there actually were some things I wanted to change even going into the tournament, but I didn't have time to or didn't have the cards with me to actually use. But stay tuned until after my matchups. I'll go over the updated deck list and go over the list I wanted to play at this event instead. But let's head over to my matchups and I'll take you through how my day went with Noivern Altaria. So round 1, I get paired up with Durant, which is kind of interesting. I have to say though, I'm feeling really good about my chances as soon as I see my opponent is playing a Durant deck. Just because if you have 1 Altaria in play, the Distort is going to do 70 to knock out Durant. They usually play the Mew from Fates Collide, which only has 50 HP, so you don't even need Altaria to knock that out as well. So you can really easily run through all of these kind of low HP basics that the deck runs. So basically they try to mill you based on the amount of Durants that they have in play. But unfortunately, most of these Durant decks are very, very heavily reliant on item cards for their strategy to be able to function. Now, they do play a couple of disruption cards like Team Flare Grunts, but most of their deck is going to be item cards in terms of the amount of disruption that they have. So Distort is just such an oppressive attack against this deck. I was able to win pretty convincingly 2-0. My opponent, however, did play the Stardust Jirachi, which did make things a little bit more interesting because they discard special energy and they're immune from damage on the following turn. So this is a situation also where playing basic energy in the deck really came in handy at powering up Distort without being reliant on special energies. So like I said, round 1 took it pretty convincingly and it was a great way to start the day. Going on to round 2, I see I am paired against Xander Bennett, also here from Rare Candy, and I was so bummed because I know Xander needs his Worlds invite. He was actually kind of banking on making, I think, top 64 or top 128 to get his invite at this tournament, so I offered him the ID, which kind of hurt me a little bit just because he was playing Zoroark, and Zoroark is one of this deck's easiest matchups just because of Sonic Volume. So we did play it out, and I won very convincingly, as you would kind of expect. Once I was able to get Sonic Volume up, there wasn't much Xander could do because I would enhanced hammer his existing energy he had in play and then use Sonic Volume to lock him out of energy for the rest of the game. And so as soon as that happens, he scoops, goes to game 2, and then when it happened in game 2, that was, you know, kind of it. But like I said, since Xander was going for his World's invite, I did offer him a tie as opposed to me taking the win just because he needs it more than I do. And like I said, I already have my World's invite. I'm playing kind of just for fun today, but nevertheless, it was kind of a bummer round 2 taking a tie to a good matchup. But hey, I want to see Xander in Nashville with me this year, so that's why I offered him the tie. So starting out 101, not ideal, but nevertheless, it's not a loss, so I still feel okay going into the next round. So in round 3, I see I am paired against a Sableye Garbodor deck. And it's another matchup where I feel really good about my chances. Sableye only has 70 HP, so one Altaria in play will knock out a Sableye. And their deck is also insanely item reliant. The entire deck actually revolves around getting item cards back with Sableye. So without the ability to use those item cards, the deck just is not that strong. Now, of course, they do have a couple of disruption cards like Team Flare Grunts, and I think even like a Rocket's Handiwork and Delinquent and some other disruption cards like that. But without Junk Hunt to get Versus Seekers back and to get Puzzles of Time back, the deck really just does not function that well. So game 1, I was able to win, I'd say, pretty convincingly. And after game 1, I felt pretty good that I was going to take this as an easy 2-0 and go on to round 4 being 2-0-1. But game 2, shuffling through my deck, I realized I prized, I think, not only my Bridget, if I remember correctly, but 3 Double Dragon energy, which is so bad. But you know what? I was thinking, you know what? Game 1 took a while. I still have 1 Double Dragon energy in deck. If I can actually get that Double Dragon energy into play, then I think I'm actually okay. Because basically my prizes are a 50-50 shot at getting another Double Dragon energy. If I can just take 1 knockout with this single Double Dragon energy I have, in conjunction, of course, with those other basic energies I have in deck, I think I'll actually be good and be able to start streaming my energy throughout the rest of the game. And of course, I also have Special Charge in the deck as well. So I was like, you know what, I could scoop and go on to game 3, but you know what? I think I can just play the game, and also even if I start whiffing energy, I think I can just try to stall for a while, not by slow playing or anything like that, but I can actually just not play cards and then try to shuffle my hand back into my deck after I amass a huge hand. So I think I have some options in terms of how I actually want to win this series. But to be honest, guys, I think I really should have scooped immediately after seeing 3 Double Dragons were prized and just go on to game 3. So unfortunately, my opponent was able to get set up pretty easily, and they were able to, I believe, mill my Special Charge or my Double Dragon energy. I forget which one. And after that, I was in kind of a bad spot. I think about half the game had went by the time that Double Dragon energy hit the discard pile. So I was already really committed to this game, and then, like I said, about midway through, that's when my opponent milled my Double Dragon energy with Team Rocket's Handiwork, or it might have even been Trick Shovel, I forget. But after that, I was kind of in a bad spot, and you know, I still tried to play the whole you know, stall type of scenario. My opponent was blowing through his deck pretty quickly, so I was thinking, you know what, I might even be able to mill my opponent, but I forgot they played Trashalanche Garbodor. I did not see it the entire game 1, so it's just not a card that was on my mind, even though these Sableye Garbodor decks normally play it. And my opponent was able to get Garbodor set up and just sweep what I had in play. And I lost game 2, and game 3 went to time literally right as we were setting up. And I was thinking, man, this is going to be a bummer. I'm going to end up taking another tie to another good matchup. But my opponent was gracious enough to actually just give me the win here. So I was able to end this series 2-0-1. Like I said, I definitely should have scooped game 2 like immediately when I saw I had 3 double Dragon Energy prize, because if Noivern gets set up, it just beats this Sableye deck. I don't have anything to worry about as long as I don't prize 3 double Dragon Energy. So I got a little bit lucky here with how this round played out, but in the future, if you prize 3 double Dragon Energy, scoop, go to game 3. Next up in round 4, I hit the deck I was dreading to see the entire tournament, and that is Trevenant. So the reason I'm so scared of running into this deck is because they have such an easy win condition against this Noivern deck. So one thing you'll notice is that the Noibats and Swablues all only have 50 HP. And that's very relevant because Trevenant, all they have to do is use Silent Fear twice, spreading 3 damage counters twice, for a total of 6, then using Espeon EX to de-evolve all of your Pokemon. It's just such an easy win condition that's just very easy to set up. They can even just Mysterious Treasure, just get the Espeon in play on turn 1 if they want, and just have it sitting there threatening the big de-evolution knockout play. And even if they don't knock you out, Miraculous Shine on Espeon EX is such a good attack against Noivern because Noibat is a colorless Pokemon. That is something we have to keep in mind. So double Dragon Energy cannot be attached to it. If our opponent actually just starts Espeon, they can just de-evolve Noivern's and keep doing that until I am run out of energies, since the double Dragon Energy gets discarded whenever Noivern gets de-evolved. So this is just such a bad matchup, it's ridiculous. Now I will say this, in game 1 I actually was in a great spot. My opponent had 2 Phantoms in play, and they had a Trevenant with 50 damage on it, and I had a Noivern GX and an Altaria in play. And I actually was in a good spot, I think, to be able to win this game, but I made a slight misplay. So basically I had Altaria in play, which means I can do 70 to the active, and if I use Boomburst GX, I can actually knock out 2 Phantoms and a Trevenant all at the same time, leaving my opponent with only an Espeon EX for the next turn. But my opponent did have 2 Rescue Scarfs in play, which actually makes doing this play a little bit awkward because he gets one of these Phantoms and an entire Trevenant line back into his hand. And basically I'm at a point where I have a turn where I can Guzma up this Espeon, break the item lock, and use Field Blower to discard the 2 Rescue Scarfs and use Boomburst to knock out only the 2 Phantoms and setting up the Trevenant for a follow-up knockout on the next turn. Or I could use Boomburst while Trevenant was active, knocking out the Trevenant and 2 Phantoms, but giving my opponent the evolution line back. And it was just kind of a weird spot, but I definitely think I misplayed here. I think I should have just used Boomburst GX to knock out this Trevenant and the 2 Phantoms at the same time. And even though my opponent would get the evolution line back into their hand, they would lose the energy they had in play. They would be forced to promote Espeon EX, and they wouldn't be able to retreat Espeon and attack with a Trevenant all in the same turn. So yeah guys, I think I kind of let go of this game. I don't think the play I did was necessarily bad. Being able to get rid of the 2 Rescue Scarfs and have access to my item cards for a turn to, Versus Seeker for a few things wasn't bad, but I just don't think it was the optimal play in this situation. So after I did this, I realized I kind of let the game slip away from me in this moment, because afterwards my opponent just went crazy with item cards, discarding my special energies and using Counter Catcher to strand, I think it was a Lele in the active spot, and it was just a bad point from there. Getting something stranded in the active spot was a really bad, just because my opponent from there can spread around whatever I have in the active spot until I can find myself another Guzma. But like I said, I just kind of let the game go, and I think I made a bit of a suboptimal play. So nevertheless, decided, let's go on to game 2 and see what we can make happen. And I do get to go first, which is nice against these Trevenant decks. That way they can't item lock you first turn. But unfortunately, my first turn wasn't that great. I prized my Bridget in this game, and I just did not have a good time. I put up a fight, and I made my opponent work for it, that's for sure. And I actually had a point where I almost, I think, came back into the game. So my opponent was threatening a big Espeon EX de-evolution play, but midway through the game, I was able to use Guzma to bring up Espeon EX while I had 3 energy on a Noivern with Choice Band and Altaria, able to get resources back with Versus Seekers and things like that, breaking the item lock and all this good stuff, and was able to knock out my opponent's Espeon EX, taking their win condition away from them. But in their hand, they had Super Odd, they had Ultra Ball, they had N, and they basically just had the entire Wombo combo that they needed in order to close out the game from there. I think they even had Enhanced Hammer or Counter Catcher. They just went off. And so I just needed them to not have this huge assortment of cards in their hand in order to be able to deal with me. So I felt confident. As long as my opponent did not have Super Odd in hand or couldn't get it that turn, I felt like I could actually win, because without Espeon, the matchup is actually a little bit tedious for Trevenant to deal with. They're not doing a whole lot of damage to this giant 200 HP GX. So like I said, the fact that they had, the giant Wombo combo ready to go just kind of put the nail in the coffin, and so I lost that game a little bit convincingly after that point. So unfortunately, I am now 2-0-1, and at this point I had been looking around at all of the tables at the event, and there is a ton of Trevenant. Looking around at this event at the tables I was at, I'd say Trevenant and maybe Buzzwole and Zoroark variants were easily the most popular decks there, which I did not expect. I expected Trevenant to show up, but I did not expect it to show up in the numbers that it did, and it kind of got me worried that I should have played the Giratina promo in order to be able to win this matchup, which is, without it, I think a little bit difficult. So I'm just hoping that the rest of the day, if I don't hit any more Trevenants, I feel like I can honestly win basically any matchup. That, or if I can dodge Wailord. That's the other tricky matchup that I would have, but luckily I felt like I wouldn't have to run into many of those, if at all. So round 5, I noticed I'm getting paired up against a Zoroark GX deck, and I was ecstatic. I was thinking, you know what, I'm going to be 3-0-1 now. It's going to be a really easy series yet again. But game 1 in the series, I open up just Lone Noibat and Swablu with no supporters of any kind in hand, and I get benched out within only a few turns. I had like absolutely nothing, which was very discouraging, because this is definitely, like I said, a very easy matchup normally for this deck. So I just had to make sure I don't get benched out, really. As long as my deck can set up, I think I am definitely the favored out of these two decks here. So game 2, it was kind of the opposite. My opponent didn't have a great start, and I was able to Sonic Volume, I think on turn 2 even. And from there, my opponent just scooped, realizing they have no way to deal with the special energy lock. And we go on to game 3, which is actually kind of nice though, because both of these games were very quick, and it gave us a lot of time to play out a complete game 3 to avoid any ties or anything like that. And so on my opponent's first turn, they start setting up and doing their thing. On my first turn, I have first turn Bridget and all this good stuff, and I felt really good about the spot that I was in. And my opponent, I noticed they opened up with an Execute, and I didn't think too much of it. I thought, you know what, that's good. It's not a Zorua. That means I'm not going to be knocked out as quickly. But then I think on my opponent's second turn, they get out the Blockade Executor, which really scared me, because Executor has this attack. It only does 10 damage, but it makes it so your opponent can't play supporter cards on their next turn. And so I remember 2 Noibat and a Swablu in play. I had all these supporters in hand. I even had a Lele, but I had nothing I could do because my opponent is locking my supporter cards. And so he starts chipping away at me with this Executor, and I'm thinking, man, if I can just hit, like even Mars Shadow would be nice, or Enhanced Hammer to get rid of this energy to prevent my opponent from using this attack on me. I can get back into this game and start locking my opponent, because like I said, if my deck sets up, I win. So that's really all I am trying to go for. My opponent played this very, very well. He recognized that he needs to not concentrate on getting set up as much as he needs to concentrate on preventing me from getting set up. Instead of going for Bridget on first turn, he went for Getsis to try to strip my item cards. Next turn, went for Getsis, got the Executor in play. So in the conjunction between using Getsis and Executor, he took my options away for actually getting set up. I remember I had Mystery Treasures in hand at one point where I could have got a Noivern out, but he took those options away from me, took my options from actually getting those cards away from me as well. And then he also played Muscle Band, which I did not expect as well, and he was able to just run through all of my little low HP basics with this Executor, and afterwards all I had was a Tapu Lele GX in play, and he was able to just knock it out with a Zoroark. And I lost. And I gotta say, guys, I was super caught off guard by this. I thought for sure that I was gonna win this series easily, no contest whatsoever. But hey, turn 2 Executor definitely can give a deck like this, which has very little non-supporter based draw, a big problem. So if you're playing Zoroark and you run into Noivern, just kind of go that route. I promise you it will definitely put in a lot of work against your opponent. So unfortunately, I am now 2-2-1, and guys, I gotta say I'm a little bit bummed because even though this was kind of a meme deck that I brought to this event, and I definitely was not stressing over making day 2, nevertheless I think this deck is actually a legitimate deck and has a lot of answers to all of the big decks in the metagame, probably outside of Trevenant unless you play Giratina promo. So I actually think my chances of making day 2 are pretty good. So taking a loss to a deck that normally I have a great matchup against was a little bit disheartening. But nevertheless, the day's not over. This is actually a smaller regional, so you can actually go 6-2-1 to make day 2, which is what I'm going to try to do from here on out. Next up in round 6, my opponent flips over another Zorua, and I have to say I feel really good. I feel like most people are just going to set up with a Bridget and things like that, and most people probably won't go for the Getsus turn 2 Executor play on you. So most of the time I feel like I have a great matchup against Zoroark, and this game was definitely no different. This series actually only lasted one single game. On turn 2 or 3 I got off Sonic Volume and my opponent just conceded the entire series. They realized, they were like, you know what, I have no way to beat Sonic Volume, so you just say, you know what man, you have this one, take it. So that is the power of Noivern. Sonic Volume, like I said, such an amazing attack against these double colorless energy base decks like Zoroark variants and Night March. So at this point I am 3-2-1. I just have to win my next 3 in a row and I should be good to make day 2 of this regional. So going into round 7, my opponent flips over a Phantump. And I just thought to myself, okay, this is where my tournament run ends. I should have most definitely played Giratina promo this weekend. I was crazy not to. I may as well just pack up my stuff now. But actually, this did not go the way I thought it would. So one thing that actually happened in game 1, which was pretty significant, is that I played Marshadow, resetting both of our hands to 4, and my opponent drew 6 off of the Marshadow, which unfortunately at a large event does constitute a double prize penalty. So what that means is I only had to take 4 prizes to win the game. That in conjunction with getting the turn 2 Distort up and going pretty quickly, my opponent just didn't have the best game and decided to scoop and go on to game 2, and I thought to myself, whoa, I won a game against Trevenant. This is a miracle. Maybe my day is not over yet. And so game 2, my opponent whiffed the turn 1 item lock, which was really big. So that allowed me to kind of get set up a little bit. And even mid game, once my opponent had the lock, I remember I had a huge turn where I was able to Guzma and play all these different item cards, play Versus Seekers to get back things like Acerola and Guzmas, and I was able to just be in a really dominant position, and my own item lock was just too powerful for Trevenant to overcome. My opponent was just not able to get set up because of my item lock, and I was able to win this series 2-0, which I could not believe whatsoever. I was in shock after I won the series. I felt a little bit bad about him getting the penalty for drawing too many cards, but hey, against one of your matchups that is kind of close to what I would call an auto loss, I will take it. So now at this point I am 4-2-1. I am definitely in this. I just have to win the next 2 and we are going to be in day 2 with Noivern GX. Next up in round 8, we were sitting down, shuffling up, and I was telling my opponent kind of about my day, and I was basically saying, hey, I hope you're not Trevenant or Wailord. If so, I think I have a decent shot. And he confirmed he was not playing Trevenant or Wailord, so I was thinking, yes, we are in there. We can win against whatever. If it's Buzzle, Zoroark, Night March, whatever it is, we are fine. We can take it down. And then my opponent flips over a Froakie, and my heart sinks. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that technically isn't Wailord or Trevenant, but Greninja is definitely not a good matchup for this deck. And my heart kind of sank because, yet again, I am not playing the Giratina promo. I didn't really think I would need it for Greninja, which is a deck that you normally play Giratina promo for. But in Expanded, it's not quite as much of a popular deck, and I only think I saw like 2 or 3 at various tables throughout the entire day, so I didn't really expect to run into this deck. And unfortunately, both of these games I lost super convincingly. I'm over here using Distort to do 50 damage, but my opponent is using Shadow Stitching, preventing my Altarias from doing any extra damage, so I'm only doing 50 to these Greninjas, and my opponent actually doesn't even play Brookwood Hill, they play Rough Seas, so I'm only doing 20 damage at a given time with my Noiverns. Yes, I technically can use Sonic Volume, but my opponent is able to just pivot between Greninjas to where I can never actually take a one-hit knockout with Sonic Volume, and I'm forced to do things like using Distort, trying to lock them for a turn out of item cards, and then trying to finish them off with a Sonic Volume next turn. But my opponent was always able to just kind of get set up even under the item lock. It always seemed like they always had a supporter or a way to have a supporter no matter what, and they just really handled the lock very well. The lock didn't even really do much to them, to be honest. Now I'm sure they played some things like enhanced hammers and choice bands that would be problematic for my deck, but even without them they took a very easy 2-0 against my deck. And I knew that was going to be the end of my tournament run, unfortunately. Now, of course, I could have actually played round 9 and make top 128 if I won, but like I said, I don't really need the points at this point. I kind of just wanted to get food, so after round 8, I dropped. Nevertheless, though, I was actually still pretty happy with my day overall. Other than the one random loss to that Zoroark deck in round 5, my deck worked pretty much as expected. I lost to the things I expected to lose to, but my problem was I incorrectly predicted the amount of Trevenant at this tournament. Now granted, I did win one of the ones I was paired up against, but had I known Trevenant would have been as big as it was, I would have easily played Giratina promo in my list. But like I said, overall, really happy with how my day went. I had a lot of fun playing with this deck and just seeing people's reaction a lot of the times. They're like, what are you playing and stuff? You know, comments like that, I would get that all throughout the day. But like I mentioned earlier, I actually have an updated version of the deck that I would have played had I been able to. So let's actually take a look at kind of the amended version of the deck and see how it differs from what I actually took to the event. So even though I was overall pretty happy with the list that I ended up taking to Virginia Regionals, there were still a few things that I definitely would have changed. One thing due to me just not being prepared and having all of my cards with me, and another just due to a bad metagame call. So largely this list is the same as the one featured earlier in the video, but in the Pokemon line, a key inclusion is the Giratina promo that I mentioned earlier. Even though I did anticipate Trevenant would show up at the event, I just did not expect and anticipate the sheer volume of the deck to appear as it actually did. So Giratina would have actually helped me out in 3 of my matchups throughout my day. Even though I did win the one Trevenant match I did play against, I did lose to another, and I lost to Greninja Break as well. So had I had Giratina promo, I honestly think I would have been in fine shape. Noivern can pretty easily deal with the other big decks in the metagame, outside of maybe Wailord, but just these break Pokemon seem to give it some trouble. So, you know, had I known what I know now, I definitely would have run the Giratina promo. Definitely, I think, was a big misstep on my part. So to make room for that, all I did was cut a Professor Sycamore out of the list. Sycamore is not the greatest draw supporter in this deck in general. Since there's so many moving pieces, you really just prefer shuffle draw options most of the time. I mean, granted, I still like having the option to have Professor Sycamore, especially since we have Versus Seeker in expanded format, but just generally speaking, it is kind of the most expendable card that I could see in the list, especially since there are 7 other draw supporters still in the deck, and then a very powerful search supporter as well in the form of Teammates. So definitely seemed like the easiest card to cut out of this list. And then the only other card I changed here was changing one Psychic Energy to a Blend Energy. And so the only reason I didn't even play this was just because I didn't have all of my expanded cards with me in Virginia. So I was unable to play the Blend Energies. I didn't feel like chasing down all of my friends and seeing if anyone had any. I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to play the 2 Psychic Energies. It's fine. It's not a huge deal. And honestly, it didn't really end up affecting my day too much. There weren't really any games that I lost due to not having access to the right energy. But the reason I wanted the Blend Energy in this list is because no matter what the combination, if you have Blend Energy and hit either the Dark or the Psychic, you can use Distort without double Dragon Energy. So without Blend Energy playing the 2 Psychics, there were actually a couple games that I did notice where I had a Psychic Energy attached to Noivern, and then I drew the other Psychic Energy and needed a Dark instead. So situations like that just kind of highlight how much more effective the blend energy is. Now, of course, it does make you more susceptible to things like Durant GX or other forms of special energy hate, but we already are going to lock our opponent's item cards anyway, so it's not like we really have to worry about Enhanced Hammer or anything. I guess it does make you more vulnerable to Zerosic, but not many decks play that outside of just a select handful. So other than that though, guys, this is exactly the same list that we featured earlier here in the video, but there's still some other deck building options I'd like to explore at some point. One thing I think you could do is actually cut your Altaria line down a little bit, or maybe even entirely, and just play a couple of different techs to deal with everything in the metagame. I think you could go back to playing Devoured Field instead of Peril City, and in place of it playing like a combination of a few techs like I think Sudowoodo, Giratina Promo, obviously, Magearna EX as a way of dealing with things like Espeon EX and Drampa GX. And also maybe a copy of Hex Maniac to deal with things like the Shining Legends Hoopa or even Xurkitree GX as well. I still think Wailord is probably a really sketchy matchup even with the Hex Maniac, just for various reasons. So you could also maybe consider playing a copy of Oranguru from Ultra Prism as well to get back some resources into your deck. There's definitely some options in terms of how you want to build around Noivern, but overall guys, I really like the archetype, and honestly I think this deck is extremely slept on. I would definitely stand behind and say this is definitely a legitimate archetype in Expanded that it just happens to be very underplayed. It's very easy to overlook Noivern. It's never really done anything back when Double Dragon energy was legal in Standard, so I think a lot of people just kind of forgot about it. And with the expanded format being a little bit more hostile to Gardevoir, now that Buzzwole Lycanroc has kind of had a bit of a boost in the format, I think Noivern is a little bit safer to play than it maybe would have been. So guys, yeah, even though I played this deck just for fun, I do honestly believe this is a viable deck in Expanded, so definitely feel free to try it out if you guys have any Expanded events coming up. But as for what actually ended up doing well at this tournament, I think the top 8 results were actually a little bit interesting. So if we just take a quick look at top 8, I think the most interesting thing is the absence of Zoroark GX. Now, of course, one Zoroark variant did take third, but just the fact that only one Zoroark variant made top 8 at an expanded event kind of really was surprising given how absolutely dominant Zoroark was in the format prior to Forbidden Light coming into the mix. So let's take a look at this top 8. We have at number 8 just a straight up Buzzwole deck, no Lycanroc. At 7th, 6th, and 5th we have Trevenant, which is also kind of interesting, kind of ties into what I just said about Zoroark. Zoroark was previously, like I said, the most absolute dominant deck in Expanded, and the fact that 3 Trevenant decks made top 8 more than Zoroark did is very surprising. At 4th we had Buzzwole Lycanroc. At 3rd we had that Zoroark variant like I just mentioned. At 2 we had Wailord EX, and at number 1, winning yet another regional, doesn't matter the format apparently, we have Buzzwole Lycanroc taking the entire event. So love it or hate it, Buzzwole is here to stay in the format, even in Expanded, where Zoroark actually could more easily deal with it before. Now that we have things like Beastring in the mix, Diancie Prism Star, etc., Buzzwole is just such a beast of a Pokemon, no pun intended, regardless of the format it's in. So that's going to be the top 8 for this regional. Congrats to everyone who did well at the event. And also a big shout out to all of the staff. This was actually an amazingly run event. I think by the time the final round ended and everyone saw standings, it was only like 9:30 or something like that from what I was told. I left, I think it was about halfway through round 8, just because my games wrapped up pretty quickly, and even at that point I think it was only like 8 or 8:30 or something like that. So this tournament wound up ending at a very reasonable hour. Very thankful for that whenever these major, huge tournaments end up going very smoothly. So that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this regional tournament report, guys. Now unfortunately, like I said, I didn't do quite as well as I had hoped to. I definitely think I should have played that Giratina promo. That would have helped me out a lot throughout my day, but overall I had a great time at this regional. It felt nice to not be pressured to make day 2 or top 64 or anything like that. It was nice to be able to just show up with a deck that I enjoyed playing and just have some fun throughout the day. I got to see a bunch of friends I don't always get to see. Got to play in some side events on day 2 of the tournament as well. Just generally had a good time. And also, big shout out to everyone who actually came up and said hi throughout the weekend. It means a lot, all of the support you guys give this channel. But as for me, I actually won't be going to any more major events until Worlds. I'm just trying to save some money since I have my Worlds invite and I'm not going for top 16. I don't really have too much incentive to actually travel to the other events up until Worlds. But I do believe Kenneth and Xander will be at Madison Regionals, if I remember correctly, and I think they're going to Internationals as well. but unfortunately I will be skipping both of these and just going to Worlds in Nashville. So hopefully I'll see all of you guys at that event. But as usual guys, feel free to like and subscribe, and if you can support this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandy, or by picking up something from our online store at rarecandytcg.com, it would mean a lot. But with that, I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you for the next one.